Welcome to the Crux of Cardio. I'm Jordan Burgin, Head of Cardiovascular at Crux. In 2024, I very nearly suffered a cardiac arrest due to an underlying illness. It was unexpected and it fundamentally changed how I looked at the industry. Since joining Crux, my role has been simple but ambitious in practice: to strengthen the cardiovascular ecosystem by supporting the people building it through talent, through fundraising and through community. Helping founders, executive clinicians and investors connect in ways that genuinely move the needle. We started the Crux of Cardio to spotlight the incredible work happening across the cardiovascular space, the technologies, the teams, the setbacks and the breakthroughs, and most importantly, the very real patient impact behind it all. I hope you enjoy this episode. We're back for another episode of the Crux of Cardio, and today we're joined by MedTech innovator royalty, Martin Herman. Do you want to give yourself an introduction?
Pleasure to meet you. So I'm Martin. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Powerful Medical.
And okay, firstly then, I took a look at your background before we spoke the first time, and it was not really MedTech related. It looked like there was a lot of things going on, but I didn't see much healthcare until about 2017, 2018, I believe. Tell me a little bit about, I guess, your early career.
Yeah. So my early career is, simply put, I'm a software engineer by background. I started building mobile apps when the first iPhones came out back in 2009. I was 14 at the time, and I got a bit lucky by getting accepted into a university course to learn iOS development, and then been building mobile apps ever since. And then, at my 18th birthday, I moved to Silicon Valley for about 2 years, and started an outsourcing business where me and another 25, 30 engineers worked on projects for predominantly American corporates or startups alike, and that was kind of my pedigree. So over the 4 years before Powerful Medical, I completed probably 45 projects in the software engineering space, and that really encompassed mobile apps, blockchain applications, AI, and so forth. And then in 2017 we had the first idea with my brother to start Powerful Medical, because I personally was it was quite exciting to work in the outsourcing business. It was a good business, but I wanted to work on my own dreams again. And I was fortunate enough to have a bit of a few partial exits, let's say, or smaller exits. So I was able to put together a very nice budget to get started on working on something of my own again. And the decision was made that will be Powerful Medical. And I can also speak a bit about how we arrived at that conclusion if you're interested in that.
Absolutely. It was my next question. I was wanting to understand, a lot of it's very niche, isn't it, what you stepped into? So I wanted to understand how you got to that, what problem you saw that you needed to solve.
Yeah, well, so I'm quite young, as is my brother, and we kind of missed all of the major technological revolutions, right? So we weren't around for the microchips. We were very young for the dot-com era. Then the mobile apps, I was 14 when I started, and then the first iPhones came out, so also quite young there. And we thought that AI, and we still believe so, that AI is our big deal, so our generational technology, and we wanted to go in that. But already in 2017, 2018, AI was in a lot of places, so we wouldn't be pioneers anymore. So we decided to look at healthcare, and healthcare really fulfilled the two and then also a third very critical parameter. So we wanted to bring something where we can be pioneers. We wanted to build a global company that has a global positive impact on people. And of course, if you're pioneering a technology, as well as having a global positive impact, of course, the expectation is you'll also be able to make some money of it. So we started Powerful Medical, and this is the reason why Powerful Medical is called Powerful Medical, not Powerful Cardiology, because we first wanted to really have a look around and see what's possible, what's existing already. Still back then there were maybe 3 or 4 certified medical devices that had artificial intelligence in their product description. I would say at least half of those were actually cheating, so it was some deterministic algorithm instead of actual artificial intelligence. And we found that very appealing, to really come with proper artificial intelligence into healthcare. And we started looking around. So literally, my brother was still a medical student in Vienna at that time point. So we first started with his university, looked at some of the problems they've been dealing with from a research perspective, and very quickly found that with our tech background and really the experiences we had, including artificial intelligence, we could do things much quicker, much better at much faster pace and much slower resource burden. But we also knew that we didn't want to just start something. So we really did a couple of studies with my brother's university, then showed those studies to a couple of professors of different fields of medicine, until in 2019 we eventually arrived to cardiology, really again through our pre-existing network, as well as through some of my brother's schoolwork. We arrived at the group of cardiology professors who were all members of the European Society of Cardiology or the American Heart Association, and they kind of led us to where we are today. They said, if you really want to do something that fulfills the three criteria that you want to fulfill, cardiology is the number one cause of death, is a major problem. And there's this brilliant device in cardiology for the last 150 years, the 12-lead electrocardiogram, the ECG. And yet, we are still quite inept in diagnosing, cardiovascular patients at the first point of contact. And the reason for that is, of course, unfortunately, beyond the cardiologists, no one can really read these ECGs because they take a long time to learn how to read an ECG. And now looking back, it is truly an art form where the physician has to look at many, many thousand of the ECGs to start seeing, confident and reliable diagnosis. And we decided to really, as our first product, bring a tool to any healthcare professional, nurse, paramedic, primary care physician, or someone in the emergency room at 3 a.m. in the morning, to be able to diagnose ECGs with the precision of a cardiologist. And we're truly doing that today, where we now have 46 indications already certified as a Class 2B medical device here in Europe that we're able to diagnose from a single 12-lead ECG. And we now have over 120,000 doctors already using it in practice. And over the last few years, we've actually fully built this out into a care coordination platform where, beyond the first-line diagnosis, we now really can take care of the patient journey downstream. So the way this would be used, our platform, the PM Cardio platform, is really by the paramedics. I don't know, they pick up a chest pain patient, they detect a heart attack, and then they can notify the cardio center and immediately drive the patient straight to the cardio center, not the closest emergency room, which already saves a lot of time. And then all of the coordination of care is done through the PM Cardio platform. So this is really our journey, where I would say, looking back, we really had to, first of all, test our own skill, because yes, we were familiar with AI, but really back in 2017, we didn't even know for sure whether there was enough digital training data available to us, whether we have the right people. So we managed to overcome that, by really working with my brother's university, as well as our pre-existing network. We published the first study sometime, 2018, 2019, quite general still. And then, 2019, we were able to use those studies to really, get the cardiologists excited, that eventually, brought us to what we're doing, for the last 5-6 years now with PM Cardio in cardiology, and then really always use the, smaller successes to build up. And yeah, eventually the outcome has been, last year we already diagnosed 135,000 heart attacks, and, according to our almost 50 published clinical studies, we can now claim that we saved at least 8,500 people last year, and we prolonged another 20,000 people's lives by 3 to 5 years, based on the very, very precise and quick first line heart attack diagnosis. And this is still just revolving around the heart attacks. If we factor in the other indications, we're able to detect atrial fibrillation. We now have a new heart failure algorithm that is able to detect heart failure from an EKG. If we factor all of this in, yes, today we can confidently say that at least part of our vision has been fulfilled, because we're truly bringing, the cutting edge technology into the hands of the frontline healthcare workers. And it is already today in 2026 making a substantial impact on outcomes of patients as well as mortality, and of course that makes us very happy. And recognition such as the MedTech Innovator win really bring those home.
That was back in 2025, right?
Yeah, that was a few months ago, back in 2025.
Congratulations. How did it feel winning MedTech Innovator?
Well, honestly, when I attended the initial, let's say, selection process, it was at a university somewhere on the US East Coast. They invited, I think, a couple hundred startups, and they made us present one after each other on a big stage. And I was sitting there, like first startups goes by, and I was sitting there, holy shit, like these guys are good. And I was sitting there. For all of the other people, I thought, okay, like if we manage to get selected for the program, that will already be quite a success with the competition. But then, of course, winning it, that is on a completely different level for sure.
Incredible. What do you think has changed since then? Do you think it's give you any sort of advantage, or do you think it's helped you gain recognition, reputation?
Yeah, for sure. I think last year in general has been quite transformative for Powerful Medical, because after a very long time, many of the clinical studies that we've been running to prove the technology actually wrapped up and got published. So we had a very positive Q3, Q4, where our clinical studies, including a massive randomized controlled trial, were presented on the main stages of the big cardiovascular events. And then to top it off with the MedTech Innovator that really, I would say, the scientific evidence convinces the senior clinicians and the associations, and then these MedTech innovators and the partnerships that are currently in the works as a result of it are then to convince the venture capitalists and potentially even the acquisition partners somewhere down the line of the success that we were able to bring and build over the last 6, 7, 8 years.
Amazing. Tell me about some bad stuff then. There's got to be some stuff that went wrong in the first 12, 24, 36 months.
Oh, absolutely. So of course, as some people call it's this 8-year overnight success, right? Where now we're looking really in great shape. The traction is there, the commercials are there, the clinical evidence is there, and I'm fully convinced that within the next 2 to 4 years we will really see PM cardio as a standard of care for many cardiovascular diagnostics. But the journey to this was hard. So I would say the hard stuff would entail us running out of money once properly. I will say there was a very unfortunate timing of the war in Ukraine, which is quite close to Slovakia, where some of the R&D space. So one of the big funding rounds back in 2022 fell through, and we got left with zero in the bank account and actually accumulated a lot of debt, but managed to pull ourselves out of it. And I would say in general, over the last 5-6 years, the VC fundraising was a sinusoid curve where there was 6 months of positivity, and yes, we tried to time it to raise there, but then there was always some sort of a downturn. I don't know, Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, so for a few months there was panic in the markets, and these were really, really hard periods, of course, for any startup in this space, because healthcare is not really a domain where you can just bootstrap it to commercials and then kind of feed the operation from your own bottom line. So you're very much dependent on venture capital funding from the get-go. And yes, over the last 5-6 years that wasn't an easy journey, but we've managed to overcome it. And I would say especially the first time this happened, it taught us a lot, because it wasn't fully properly communicated at the time. But whenever this was threatened or threatening to happen, after that, the communication always was very transparent towards the team. We came up with various programs where people could exchange a part of their salary for ESOP, for example, and so forth. And together as a team, we always survived, and ultimately, I will say, always came out of it stronger. So tough ride, but definitely worthwhile ride.
Sounds like it. What's fundraising like in the AI space? Because I feel that, it's a buzzword. Everyone loves it and people want to be involved with it, but I don't feel like everyone fully understands it either. And it seems like so many companies are trying to push on the AI twist now. So I wonder how that affects raising.
I would say this is there was a time before ChatGPT and there was a time after ChatGPT. Whereas, uh, in the time before ChatGPT, I would still say the major issue was convincing all of the right people that what we propose to build is actually buildable and works at a level where this is significant for clinical practice. So there was a limiting factor, and then of course after ChatGPT, like the floodgates opened, and VC started pouring money into anything AI. And of course, now there is the worry of, does it make sense to invest in these 3 AI startups if this is actually something that ChatGPT can do in 2-3 years down the line? And I would actually say like we're benefiting out of the current situation because we've been around for such a long time where today it is cool to build AI. So you have a lot of people building AI, but we're already able to reap the benefits from, starting to build the AI prior to it being cool. So whereas now you have a lot of small companies appearing at events with some prototype, or really MVP version of their product, our product is already in clinical practice, used by over 120,000 doctors. It had been validated across 50 studies on 300,000 patients. So we have a bit of a head start. So at the moment the situation is quite good, but due to all of the events in the last 5-6 years, it has been a lot of ups and downs, I think.
I think 100,000 is quite the head start there. I think it's a little more than a head start. And what have you learned the most? So you came from an AI tech background anyway. What have you learned the most about AI in real world clinical environments that surprised you?
I would say there are many bottlenecks in the clinical world, especially here in Europe. Like we have this massive GDPR regulation, which is I would say on its own quite restrictive in that no one really understands this. This is, for many doctors in Europe, GDPR means, I cannot share any data, where in fact it means I can share data, but I need to be, a bit more careful. So that is like quite restrictive over here in Europe. And of course, we see a lot of regulations also in the US, but I would say in general, what the biggest lesson of the last 6-7 years has been for us is that, to succeed in healthcare, you not only need to have life-saving solutions, but then, it also has to work from an economical perspective. So, this is something that, has to be thought of from day one virtually, is, not only the clinical benefit, but also the economical arguments behind it. And then, of course, you have to also understand, the extent of the needed process to actually make it work in a hospital. And what I mean by that is, overcoming the regulations, making sure that you have a great, onboarding team. So to onboard the hospitals, teach them how to use the technology, educate the doctors on the benefits of the technology, all the while you're, still in a process of, constant clinical review or constant clinical validations, where, and of course also development, right? We now have 46 or 47 indications certified. We keep developing. So in general, to maybe summarize, this is like, on one hand, just to get started, it's quite hard because you need to follow wide variety of different regulations, be it data privacy, medical device regulations, cybersecurity, and so forth. And then, once you actually get to this product and you have something that saves lives in a clinical study, you still need to come up and, adjust the product in such a way where it is also economical for the hospitals to use. And once you get there, then you actually have to, go and implement in the hospitals. And there are always, multiple routes that you can choose to go. And in our case, I think we've been quite good at figuring out tricks in order to speed the process up for us a bit. What I mean by that, for example, is we have this PM Cardio platform, which consists of a mobile app where a user can take a picture of an EKG, we digitize it and analyze it and give the 46 different indications. And then there's also a web app that integrates with the EHRs, as well as an API that integrates with the devices. And now, whereas many other companies in the space really have to go to a hospital and do all of the integrations, all of the compliance, 6 to 9 to 12 months of work just for a hospital to try the solution of the first patient. In our case, for example, the mobile app is available as a standalone medical device on the App Store and the Play Store, where any physician can try it out. And this then means that in most cases, when we actually go to the hospital to install the full system, by that point, they're already fully convinced of the technology, because many of them have been using it sometimes for 1, 2, 3 years. So there is no more questions regarding the clinical perspective or the clinical performance, or whether this is something useful to them. We therefore just have to deal with the other stuff, such as the compliance pieces, the integration, the onboarding is just much easier to deal with once you already have the clinicians convinced of the efficacy and utility of the solution.
Let's talk about that. So we actually spoke about, I don't know how early days it was, but you mentioned at the start there were some skeptical cardiologists about the system. How do you overcome that?
Yeah, well, so this is interesting. Of course, going as a relatively small company, predominantly staffed by relatively young people, and going to convince cardiologist with 60 years of practice that our solution is better at reading ECGs than he is, always will be inherently a difficult discussion. But what we figured out is quite a neat trick. So we, whenever we meet someone who's skeptical, we ask them to bring the last 10 most difficult EKGs from the last quarter, for example, and somewhere know the outcomes. And then we actually test our solution versus the human on those 10 most complex cases from the last quarter. And it is always the same story. It is, first ECG, you can see that they're convinced, okay, we'll trick these young guys with their AI product. And then we get the first one right. And it's the second one, third one, and by the fourth one, we actually have pictures from hospital onboarding sessions where the biggest skeptics, cover their eyes and go like, facepalm, and cannot believe that the AI solution was able to correctly interpret cases where even they made a mistake. Of course, doing this retrospectively is quite fair, because by that point, everyone knows the outcome of the patient. So literally, if we try to prove to someone who's skeptical that our heart attack algorithm can detect heart attacks on the EKG where no human will detect them, we ask them to bring 10 suspect ECGs with 10 angiograms of the patients, where it's either conclusively confirmed or denied this is a heart attack or not. And then, as I said, first 2, it is usually attributed to luck, but by the 4th to 5th ECG, that's when we're able to convince even the biggest skeptics.
Amazing. And I want to zoom back in on something you touched on before. You mentioned about the economic impact. The other part is obviously, or we'll go into more depth for it. What does it actually change on the clinical workflow? So what do they get from it? What is the benefit?
So let's, just to keep it super simple, mainly regarding the heart attack use case, to focus on one diagnosis is easier than to focus on the others, because, I don't know, atrial fibrillation, you would talk about primary care, because that's where that's interesting, right? So let's talk about the heart attack. So it varies from country to country what the pitch for the product is. But, if I narrow it down to the United States, at the moment, to be an accredited heart attack center, you have to meet certain KPIs. So you have to meet a time KPI. So the average time it takes you to handle a heart attack patient, bring him on the table and inflate the balloon. And then you also have to have a KPI that kind of tracks the mortality rate of these heart attacks patients. And they're quite aggressively set in the United States. So in order to become a accredited center for heart attacks, you need to meet some mortality and some time to treatment. And now, today, the only way the American hospitals are able to meet those criteria is by virtually taking every single patient with a small suspicion of a heart attack and treat him as if this patient for sure has a heart attack. And this causes a lot of false positives. So we work in the United States with centers where sometimes the false positive rate in terms of heart attacks is up to 70-80%. And for them, what the PM Cardio solution really allows to do is they're able to reduce this false positive cath lab activation. It costs them between 5, 10, 15,000 per false positive cath lab activations. They're able to reduce them by about 90% in many cases. So what we're pitching to American hospitals for the heart attack use case is, look, you need to meet these KPIs to keep your heart attack accreditation. This causes currently a ton of false positives, which costs you a ton of extra money. And by procuring PM Cardio, you're able to still diagnose the true positives correctly, but will clean off all of the false positives, which ultimately costs you hundreds and thousands, potentially millions based on the sensor every year. And this is really the times where at 3 a.m. they call the full interventional team to the hospital. A main cardiologist looks at the EKG and says, okay, this is not a heart attack. They're sending them back home. And of course, no one is reimbursing for that. So, while our sensitivity on detecting heart attacks is, about twice as high compared to the current standard of care, while really matching the high specificity, really the major benefit there is not catching more heart attack patients. It is, filtering the true heart attack patients out from all of the false positives, because those are expensive and unnecessary burden to the system. And we can really quantify these economical arguments on a per indication level. So I don't know when we're talking about atrial fibrillation, like we're usually talking about preventing strokes, which are very, very expensive to treat, and are much more riskier for unmanaged atrial fibrillation patients. So the economic arguments would be more oriented toward primary care or to some screening program, and they would be based, for example, around the stroke diagnosis. So this is how we were looking at it, and fortunately, we were able to run about 20-25 studies also in the United States, including some quality improvement projects where we really made sure not to only measure the clinical benefit, but then to also measure the economical impact that the solution will have.
Amazing. And I believe you're pushing for FDA this year. Where does the business sit in terms of commercial traction right now?
Yeah. Well, so at the moment we're generating a few million in annual recurring revenue, which is mostly coming out of Europe, because Europe is where we are currently certified. But since last year, I think February or March, we are an FDA breakthrough designated device. So this is the PM Cardio heart attack use case. And we've been really in the process throughout last year and also this year now, and we really expect the full approval to come during this summer, which means we will be able to start commercializing in the United States, where of course the first place will be the centers where we already successfully concluded the pilots as clinical studies or QI projects. But those centers are usually part of bigger health systems, so we will be looking to really bring on board commercially first those centers that participated in the studies, and then branch out to their spoke sites, for example, or to their referring emergency rooms, and then go on from there. Of course, we're in a very fortunate position of having quite a large waiting list, really in the hundreds of American hospitals that are on a list to get onboarded once the full approval is here. So virtually all of our energy and focus now goes toward making sure that we are in fact ready to do the onboarding as soon as we get the green light from the FDA.
I'm interrupting this episode to bring you a word from our sponsors, TTP. TTP is a leader in complex medical technology development with deep scientific and engineering expertise. They support ambitious MedTech companies in solving high-risk, high-complexity challenges where there's no margin for error. Whether you're tackling uncharted technical territory or racing to bring a product to market, TTP provide clarity and direction. By de-risking innovation and ensuring seamless alignment with regulatory and manufacturing demands, TTP help you move forward with speed and confidence. To find out more, check out the show notes.
Amazing. Look, you guys you've done a lot, you've achieved a lot, you're at a great stage. There's a lot of data around you guys. You're at a stage now where you can probably answer this question quite well. So what's the biggest challenge that you've had so far? Is it, regulatory? Is it technical? Is it clinical adoption? What do you find has been the toughest hurdle for you?
Yeah. Well, dealing with all of the regulations is definitely something that costs a lot of time, energy, and resources. And especially here in the European Union, you first have to comply with whatever European frameworks exist, and then you have to comply also with local frameworks. So, just an example, I will say, whereas the US has this, SOC 2 information security certification, Europe has its ISO 27001 certification. But then, I don't know, the UK comes up with their framework, Belgium comes up with their framework, you have to still comply. And then, this you have to fulfill in order to just get into the hospital and start processing their data and giving your product to their physicians. But then if you actually want to be commercially successful, you then also have to deal with the reimbursement, for example, which again, in the European Union, whereas we pretend to be one market, we're not. We're 27 different healthcare markets, which means literally, if you want reimbursement in Belgium, you do it separately in Belgium, you do it separately in the Netherlands, you do it separately in Germany, Austria. And it is always, a process you start from scratch, and it's always very complicated. So I would say, on the European side of things, of course, these regulatory hurdles are quite massive. And of course, over the pond, we've been held back by the FDA in terms of, you cannot, there is a level where you cannot go further without having the approval. And I'm like, by no means saying this is a mistake of the FDA or someone. It is just that, yes, these processes, for obvious reasons, take time and resources. And, I will just say that we've now reached a point where without the FDA approval, there is not too much more we can do in the United States. But, fortunately, we're a breakthrough designated device, meaning we're now on a fast track to get the approval. We've been in the process for a very long time now. The clinical evidence is there. So, we're very, very hopeful and actually, excited, that hopefully this summer it will finally come true. And this is then our go signal to really relocate the core team members in the United States and start building out the commercial operation over there.
What do you think that commercial operation will look like? And even the relocation and the build, what do you think well, let's rephrase it. If things go well over the next 2 years, what's that US operation going to look like?
Yeah. Well, so let me just say this is, we were fortunate last summer where we got a massive research grant from the European Commission. So we got $46 million as a non-dilutive grant to finance further R&D. So this is really building out the platform in, many further directions, potentially also working on something for the patients, and really adding more indications. So the R&D is covered, and we really want to keep this over here in Europe because it is very cost effective. We have great talent, in the Central Eastern European region, and again, able to get a lot of bang for our buck. So we want to keep that here. And then on the US side, we are now still be looking to raise approximately 30 to 50 million USD, which is to really kickstart a commercial operation. And it's quite a good position for us to be in because, of course, the investors want to, or VC wants to fund the things that are relatively certain, right? So they're not super happy to go fund some complicated R&D, which might work, might not work, might take 3 times as much time and 3 times as much money, and then eventually still be in a massive regulatory proceeding. So they, that is the risk because we have the grant, 46 million to fund the further R&D, and therefore now we can get the investors to really invest in commercializing a product that already has been proven clinically and economically and commercially over here in Europe, in the United States. Now, with 30 to 50 million, where we are able to get over the course of the next 2 years is, we're literally talking hundreds of hospitals, which will mean, quite a large commercial staff on the side of US things. And this is again why the key people are moving to the United States, because I think the R&D which is happening here in Europe, we've already figured out. We have great people already working in the company, sometimes 4, 5, 6 years, where there I don't really have any worries anymore. And now our big task ahead will be building out the commercial operation in the United States, which again, will be quite a challenge. But I think, we're quite well prepared for what is to come, because we have somewhat operated in the US market already for the last 2 to 3 years. And that is through all of the clinical studies and, pilots run as research projects with American hospitals under IRB. That has already taught us a lot.
I don't know how much you can tell me on this next question or what you can tell me about it, but a lot of people, when they do go and launch in the US, partnerships are a big part of that. How are you guys looking at the partnership model? Is there any strategic things that you can tell me about?
Yeah, of course. So there are areas where we see that commercializing our PM Cardio platform will be very straightforward from the position of the company and its commercial team itself. But then there are other areas where the product still has a ton of value, but the commercial model is a bit different. So I don't know, for example, selling into emergency care anywhere around the world is relatively hard, because it's many times already funded by local government tenders, which are quite scattered and quite hard to compete in for a early stage startup or even scale up at this stage as Powerful Medical. And there it actually makes sense to maybe look at what emergency services are already using in terms of their devices, and maybe look at potentially bringing the AI technology sometimes somehow within those devices, if you catch my drift. So we're looking at quite a few in progress partnerships in the pre-hospital space. We also have something ongoing with pharma. So we recently, last summer, announced a partnership with Roche, where we will integrate the PM Cardio platform within their frontline Cobas Pulse device, which is now mainly used as a test for blood sugar, for glucose. So it has like this little pad where you can put in like a blood specimen. But it also has a camera where you can take a picture of the EKG. So in that direction, there has already been announced a partnership, and really the vision is to equip the frontline workers who already have the Cobas Pulse device with another big thing that their device can do now, thanks to a software upgrade.
I've got another question that you might not be able to answer, or you could answer. What's the future for you guys? Do you plan to? You've already touched on a few of the other indications that you can look at, but do you eventually think you might branch out of cardiovascular care as well?
I would say, never say never, but we see cardiovascular as this massive topic where there's still, so much to do. And I think, we've now put ourselves in a position where it makes sense to really pursue this cardiovascular angle even further, because, as we see, one of the big hurdles is to actually get the hospitals using something, right? And then bolting on more stuff, if you get a hospital using your first product already, is relatively speaking easier. And there we actually have a major benefit where, whereas many other AI companies have maybe 3, 4, 5 monthly active users within a hospital using the AI product, in our case, in many cases, we see that we have 100, 150, 180 physicians within one hospital site using the PM Cardio platform. And, of course, those are all somehow related to cardiovascular pathways of the patient. So really now this further R&D is, definitely tailored to go in that direction, to provide the, additional value through this further R&D to those physicians already using PM Cardio on a monthly basis, in many cases even on a daily basis. Again, if I compare ourselves to, I don't know, Viz or Rapid, which are predominantly massive stroke platforms, whereas their product would be used by 3, 4, 5 physicians in a hospital, our product is used by 100, 150, 180 physicians. So we will tailor our further R&D in that direction. But our ultimate vision as a company is first and foremost make sure every EKG recorded within a health system goes through PM Cardio, and that today we are in a pre-hospital, so a lot of paramedics, emergency physicians already using PM Cardio, and we see that we now also have the cardiologists on board, all of the nurses and so forth. But we're also thinking in a direction of, okay, today almost every patient has some sort of smart device. What can we do there, right? What can we do for the patient upon discharge from the hospital? Again, still very much relating to ECG inherently, because it is one of the leading cardiovascular tests. But there are some ideas to potentially also use more different data types, especially on the side of the patient, to arrive to cardiovascular conclusion and then really keep managing the patient through the platform. And as a really high level example, I would say today those variables still, I would say, are considered medical novelties because they don't really change the standard of care. But what we would like to bring in the future potentially is really being able to connect the patient to the cardio center that is already using PM Cardio, where suddenly if your watch tells you have atrial fibrillation, you can show it to the biggest atrial fibrillation expert in the hospital next to you, and the assumption is by that point he will already be familiar with the platform and therefore get the patient to adequate treatment and management much quicker than the current route that the patient has to take.
So that kind of throws me a little bit. That's like it's almost like a completely new playing field as well compared to what you was doing traditionally. So do you see Powerful Medical as are you building a platform, or are you trying to build like potentially a new standard of care really?
Yeah, so we definitely see Powerful Medical as a platform, and it made sense for us to start with the, let's say, biggest skeptics, right? The senior cardiologists who have been doing this for the last 50 years, because we see that now that we managed to convince them that this is something that is valuable and extremely useful in their clinical practice, with their help, we can now branch out, right? And a great example of this is our new heart failure algorithm. So we now have a couple of regions in Europe really end-to-end onboarded on PM Cardio, where we use the heart attack use case to penetrate the health system. Again, the heart attack patients will end up in the cardio center, which is obviously the place where we want to be. They will go through pre-hospital, either through the emergency system or through primary care. And now that we've already brought the heart attack use case to those environments, we can expand, for example, to heart failure. So there are now regions in Europe where you can go to your primary care physician. We're able to detect heart failure or low ejection fraction from the EKG, which is something you could previously only detect from an ultrasound. And now through the PM Cardio platform, they can immediately order this patient from primary care to a follow-up with a cardiology specialist. And this is really demonstrates what we would like to do in the future is, okay, we're in some places already super strong. How can we use those environments to really provide more and more value and expand the capabilities of the PM Cardio platform ultimately for this win-win scenario where the system wins because they've been able to handle a patient quickly for very cost-effective finances. The patient is happy because he also got to the doctor quickly and didn't have to go through 6 different follow-ups just to get to the right physician. And then ultimately, we as a company are also very happy because we ultimately will do and are doing what we set out to do in the first place, and that is to make the world a better place and leave a very, very positive impact on patients' cardiovascular health.
We've talked a lot about skeptics today, but I kind of want to dip my toes in a little bit further with it. Is there any common trends that the skeptics have? Is there anything that like comes up quite regular? Like I feel like there's lots of areas of worry. You know, people are worried about AI in general. In particular, they might be more specialized to what they're doing is the ECG. What are the more common topics or questions that you hear?
So I would say again, there is a world before ChatGPT and after ChatGPT. I think before ChatGPT, believing that AI can, and again, like this doesn't strike me as a tech person just because I've worked with AI in the past before and I've seen what it can do. But intuitively, before ChatGPT, it was very hard to convince physicians that you've now been learning to read ECGs for the last 30 years, and here is an algorithm that does it better than you. Versus when after ChatGPT, literally every doctor I know has tried taking, I don't know, the last 10 patients files, putting it into ChatGPT and see what will happen. And if you see, I don't know, primary care physicians doing this on 10 of their last patients and ChatGPT arriving to the same conclusion, suddenly you see that suddenly this AI reading ECGs doesn't become as much of a incomprehensible innovation, right? Suddenly, if ChatGPT can read patient cards and give me a correct outcome of a patient, why wouldn't some AI system also be able to read ECGs and then give me the correct diagnosis? So the world has definitely changed in that regard, but what also helps at the end of the day, and this is the proper way to do it, is to really run these clinical studies, including randomized controlled trials, to show that the technology works. Because I would say, there are some people who will never be aligned with the AI revolution that's going on. And for those, there is, nothing you can say. But the biggest skeptics who are skeptical, but then allow themselves to be convinced with the evidence, those we always kind of get on our side, in the end, either through like their personal experience. And we literally, you cannot imagine, we had situations where we went to onboard a hospital, and then like on the way back from the onboarding, we stopped at the gas station, and it took 2 hours until the hospitals, on the way back, called us saying, "Hey guys, we just diagnosed our first patient where no one thought there is something wrong with him. The app said, this is the diagnosis." So we took him to the cath lab, and yes, like the fully occluded vessel, it was 100% heart attack. It saved his life. This happened within 2 hours of onboarding, and we see this many times. So it is, at the end of the day, yes, there are probably some people, and it's a tiny amount, that you will be never able to convince of AI being beneficial for their healthcare domain. But then I would still say the vast majority you can either convince through this positive personal experience or through really rigorous, robust clinical evidence. And then, that evidence you can also then use to convince the clinical associations who are publishing the clinical practice guidelines. And this is really one of the major targets of Powerful Medical, to really bring PM cardio, at least in some of the use cases, into the clinical practice guidelines as class 1 recommendations, at least for some indications. And I would say with heart attack specifically, the evidence base today is there. And we see, guideline commentaries, we see what's being discussed in congresses. There is a very good chance that over the next 2 to 4 years, we will see a class 1 recommendation in the chest pain or acute coronary syndrome or heart attack guidelines, which will say AI-assisted triage at the first point of medical contact is recommended, because some of our studies have actually proven that it significantly impacts the patient outcomes, both in terms of time to treatment and also in terms of the mortality. And mortality is ultimately the number one thing that you have to prove to make something standard of care.
It's like a domino effect, really, isn't it? You've had your clinical data, that's led to social proof, and then the social proof, they'll turn into internal champions, and it's sort of spreading it. And okay, it's good. Oh, it's not as easy for everyone. It sounds like you guys have had a great story so far. What I would like to do is ask you, what advice would you give people that are trying to get into the AI space in medtech or healthcare?
Well, I would say in general, and again, like we also had some limitations there, even though we thought we didn't, but it is about really understanding the problem deeper. And what I mean by that is the reason our AIs were able to perform much better than some of the other research teams AIs that are being developed or have been developed at the time is because we made very sure that our software engineers working on this actually understand the clinical problem. So really you can imagine it in a format where once or twice a week for a full day, there was an expert cardiologist sitting in our AI office, speaking to our AI engineers about how, something manifests on the ECG. So in the case of our AI team, they were working with data that they actually understood. And some of them are now so good in reading EKGs that they will outperform someone with a medical degree, even though they're software engineers, because they really truly understand the problem. And this goes across the board, right? You have to understand, especially in healthcare, you have to understand, in depth everything that, kind of you have to do in order to solve a problem that you're solving with the proposed product that you have. And, in the clinical world, this is hard, right? So you have to have the doctors who are happy. You have to have the finance department who is happy. You have to, satisfy the compliance people. And again, by deeply understanding not only the problem that you're solving, but what it actually takes, to get into clinical practice, that is something that, is a massive, massive benefit for any starting entrepreneur. So really the research. And I said in the beginning that we thought we were there, but we also had our limitations. Yes, to a large degree, between 2017 and 2020, we were not a cardiology company, and we did things correctly in that, it wasn't the first thing that came to mind, and we decided, out of nowhere, we will start with ECGs because they're so cool. We actually did the research behind it. But now looking back, yes, there was still a lot we didn't know that, had we done more research and had we spoken to more doctors, more hospitals, we could potentially decrease the suffering and increase the pace we were able to bring this into where it is today.
I kind of want to hack into your head a little bit. I want to reach into your mind and find something out. So we've obviously seen an uprise on AI roles and data engineers and things like AI engineers. It's becoming quite a competitive market in the recruitment space. How do these people think? How would you be trying to attract people? You've obviously grown the business into a nice spot. What AI businesses in the healthcare and MedTech space, what should they be doing to raise their talent attraction?
Well, yeah. So I'm an engineer myself, so that was a big benefit in the beginning. Look, ultimately, I would say there is a point, of course, to get top people, you must be willing to pay, top dollar. But at the end of the day, there is always a limit of, okay, this is enough money. And then what is the deciding factor is how cool is the technology I'm working with, and what is the impact of me working with this technology. And in our case, being able to say that we're pushing what is currently possible with technology while saving lives. And then, literally now on a weekly basis, we have someone calling us, hey, my father had a heart attack and the ambulance came and they picked him up, immediately used your product to detect a heart attack. And he's now, 2 weeks later going to a football game, playing with his buddies, yeah, like it is, quite easy to excite the right people if you're able to say, we're pushing the limits of technology, really working with the cutting edge. In our case, that means, we get access to a bunch of experimental features with AWS, for example, or so forth, and really, work technologically on a super high level. And while we're saving lives, and today there is already the status, and this took a long time again to get here, where literally now on a weekly basis we get the reminders of, yes, what we're doing has an impact, makes a lot of sense, saves lives. It's a definitely a dream to hire for.
So focus quite heavy on the project and the product then. So make sure that's good first. That's really interesting, because some of these people we speak to, especially in the Bay Area, even like south of France recently, you'll ask them how many processes they're in, and they're like, yeah, I'm speaking to 4 or 5 different companies. So there's so many people crying out for this talent, and attracting it's tough, and they get paid well. So Thank you for that. That's very, very.
Engineers want to work on cutting edge, and they want to solve real problems that will eventually have an profound impact on the world and people around them. Especially, this is how you get top quality engineers.
Cool. And then on the fundraising side, you guys have had, to get that amount of non-dilutive funding is incredible, by the way. It's huge and it's amazing. You're going through now another big raise. What advice would you give to people raising right now in the space?
Focus on the correct type of investors. And what I mean by that is, still medical device is, I would say, don't assume that your medical device investor will have a deep understanding of what it is that you're trying to do. Now, this is something that we had to learn as well, is really picking out the investors who have previously invested in something within our space. So it doesn't really make too much sense to go, in our case, after a biotech investor that invests into, drug development. Yes, like they're in the medical world, but do they understand anything about the ECG? No. Yeah, like that is a given. So I would say the biggest success in fundraising is always when you're able to target the right VCs who, in the best case, have some pre-existing knowledge about the problem or the space that you're in, because that simplifies the process. And this is we've spoken to hundreds of funds over the last 7-8 years, and we see that the discussions with the investors in our space, focusing on cardiovascular medical device, are even much easier. So whereas generalist VC fund or even biotech fund, it would take me hours and hours of conversation to explain what we're doing and why it's important. In many cases, by picking the investors very carefully, you're able to get to a very good point within 15 minutes if the investor has the pre-existing knowledge. And to a large degree, I would say in the US, there is also a great resource, which are the doctors. So in our case specifically, we raised $3.5 million USD by fundraising with 60 plus or pooling 60 plus American physicians who were part of our clinical studies. Now, this is, again, I would say something where you see yes, American doctors make way more money than European ones, but they also have the hustle mindset. And this is, I would say, a big difference between Europe and the United States. But for us as a company to be able to raise, 3.5 million USD from 60 doctors who all participate in our clinical studies, that is a huge level of validation. And I can totally see this happening for other companies as well. Like if American doctors like something, they will put their own money into it. And to a large degree, they are ultimately the ones that can evaluate your chance of success the best compared to everyone else. So this is really also a very proud moment for us, where even the whole story around this is we started all of these studies in the United States, and then once every couple of days someone wrote us, "Hey guys, this is super cool, can we invest?" He said, "Yeah, okay, we're burning a lot of money every month, and you're like 25K, 50K drop in a bucket." And then this person started the Excel spreadsheet, and suddenly there was 500K in it, 1 million, 1.5 million. And at the 1.5 million mark, we thought, okay, it's worthwhile to open like an AngelList pool, and we'll collect 500,000. That is a reasonable expectation. Now, we had to increase our limit twice because the interest was so huge that in the end it was 3.5 million by I think 64 or 66 physicians. And not only does this validate the idea, but what this de facto means is now I have motivated physician in many hospitals in the United States who at some point down the line has a very big incentive to also help me within that institution to bring my product into that institution, right?
Cool. My last question, and thank you for going into depth there as well, because it's going to be inspiring a lot of people. I think there's probably going to be a lot of people that watch this, and I'm looking for a bit of inspiration. My last question as well is, we're seeing so much more young CEOs stepping into the market now. People that are, not necessarily fresh out of university, but they're bringing these products out and they don't really know where to start. You've achieved a lot. You've done a lot. You've won MedTech Innovator. You was nominated for Forbes Under 30, Breakthrough Designation. These are incredible achievements for a young CEO. What advice would you give to other young CEOs out there early on in their career?
Well, in our case, our young age has been both a blessing and something that held us back in the past. But we've learned to use it to the benefit always, and that is, what I mean by that is, look, we the younger generation are much more faster, much more flexible, much more, skilled in using, modern technology, vibe coding. We can get much more stuff done quicker than the older generation. And yes, like we unfortunately have to try many things much more often because we will fail much more often than the senior, more experienced guys. But we are the ones with the energy. We are the ones that grew up with technology. We are the ones that really get to experience the world as it is today, not the way it has been 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And to a large degree, I've spoken to funds that have adapted their thesis into investing exclusively into these younger founders. And the reason they cite is that this is because we see that us as the partners in the fund, we were cool 10, 15, 20 years ago when the world looked like that. In today's world, we actually struggle to even select what will be cool 5, 10, 15 years from now. So how can we invest in our generation of people if we are already the people of yesterday already today, right? So this is, as I said, try to use this young age, the energy and the awareness of, and the growing up with technology already super much at our fingertips. Use this to your maximum advantage. And one very big positive in healthcare specifically is that as a young CEO, you will always stand out. So regardless of what event, conference, wherever you go, as a young CEO, you will be more memorable than any of these 40, 50, 60-year-old guys in suits inherently, just because they will remember. And this has been my case since ever, is like I was always very easy to find in a crowd after finishing my presentation on stage because I was the youngest guy.
No, it makes sense. A lot of people obviously will look and be like, how have they got there? What do those guys do? Who is this person? They're new on the market. As well as that, the other part is, people knew the space is massive, but a lot of people know each other, right? So when there's a new kid on the block, they are going to stand out. But look, I can't thank you enough for your time today, Martin. I know we've overrun a little bit in terms of timing, so I just wanted to thank you for coming on the podcast. And it's been some brilliant insights from yourself, and I wish you and Powerful Medical all the best.
Thank you, Jordan, and this was an amazing experience for me, so thank you very much.
If there's one thing this space has taught me, both personally and professionally, is that progress in cardiovascular care is never the result of one individual. It's built by ecosystems, by teams, by people willing to take the long bets on hard problems. At Crux, our mission is to support that ecosystem through talent, capital, and community. The podcast is one small part of that effort, a place to share the real stories from people shaping the future of cardiovascular care. If you found value in today's conversation, I would love for you to follow the show and share it with someone building in this space. And if you're a founder, operator, or investor working on something meaningful in the cardiovascular care space, we'd love to hear from you.